think it's fair to say that there are as many different approaches to successful leadership as there are leaders. However, that being said, I think the most successful leaders in business and government have learned that the best way to inspire people to take action and achieve results is to give people a challenge or a goal, and then get out of the way and let people manage the process. Effective leaders allow their employees and team members to use their skills and experiences and abilities to get the job done. This leadership formula has been repeated successfully thousands and thousands of times. In the 1960s, American President John F. Kennedy challenged citizens to land a man on the moon before the decade is over. And although John Kennedy did not live to see his vision come true, he did provide the necessary government support and direction for this project. But I think more importantly, once the funding was in place, Kennedy stepped aside and let NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, manage the work and get the job done. In 1969, 2 astronauts successfully landed on the moon. Managers and leaders are 2 very different types of people when it comes to thinking outside the box. As Abraham Zelensky noted in his Harvard Business Review article, managers, and I'm quoting him, typically focus on goals that arise out of their necessity rather than their own desires. Managers excel at diffusing conflicts between individuals or departments, placating all sides while ensuring that the organization's day-to-day business gets done, unquote. Leaders, according to Professor Zelensky, and I'm quoting him again, adopt personal, active attitudes towards goals. They look for the potential opportunities and rewards that lie just around the corner, inspiring their troops by firing up their creative process with their own energy. The leader's relationship with employees and co-workers are intense, and therefore their working environment is often chaotic. I think the reason leaders are better able to inspire change and even revolutions within companies and countries is linked closely to the fact that they are not driven by power and politics, but rather leaders are guided by principles and values. We'll discuss these principles and values in more detail in just a few minutes. But let's talk about managers, because managers, on the other hand, tend to have a strong sense of the corporate community and hold very close ties to their organizations. But leaders are able to detach themselves from the management maze. They are able to operate successfully without being bound by one ideology or playing the game of corporate politics that inhibits change and stifles creative thinking. In this way, many leaders can make better decisions. In fact, one of the most important responsibilities of a leader is to make good decisions. To help the leader make good decisions, he is constantly looking for new ideas, creative solutions to problems, data, and information that will support his thinking. The leader knows that most decisions are not major. Nevertheless, they are important because one decision impacts the next, and so forth. This is why it's important for the leader to think innovatively and to use creative thinking techniques when making decisions. If a bad decision or a wrong decision is made early on, it will have a serious impact on a cluster of decisions to be made later. So many leaders that I've interviewed said they resist making major decisions prematurely. Instead, they use a creative process called fact-finding. By analyzing the choices and consequences of each phase of a complex issue or decision, leaders can better control the outcome. For example, one leader I interviewed was pondering a complex issue that would impact many people and departments within her company. It included new products, research and development, marketing, and sales, to name just a few of the departments. And so the leader kept an inventory of the issues and stages of this complex issue so that she could monitor the various phases of the issue as they emerged. And like a juggler, the leader kept all of these factors in the air until she was comfortable in making her final decision. By this time, she had gathered enough facts, data, information from the various departments to know how her final decision would impact the company and who it would help or hurt the most in terms of manpower, budget, and workload. In today's business and political environment, decisions are made one of two ways, either by using a democratic decision-making process or a dictatorial decision-making process. Now, the democratic or participatory decision-making style requires the leader to solicit the views and perspectives of others. It also implies that the leader will involve members of the team to help him or her make the right decision. Typically, major policy decisions and political decisions are made using the democratic or participatory approach because there are many special interests that are impacted by policy and political decisions. For example, a company that is planning to build a new manufacturing plant or close a product line or hire 500 employees. These kinds of decisions are typically made by leaders using a democratic or participatory process. Another way to make decisions is the dictatorial process. This dictatorial method does not require the leader to seek outside counsel. Rather, the leader takes sole responsibility for his or her actions and, as the Nike commercial motto suggests, just does it. Typically, you will find the dictatorial decision-making process used in the military, police departments, and other traditional command and control situations where time or the element of surprise is very important. In my interviews with leaders, I found that most of their good decisions were made using a participatory or democratic process. That is to say, leaders involve teams or a wide selection of people to help them make key decisions. And while we're on the subject of teams, it's important to note that teams are a very dynamic part of every leader's success. Teams are a leader's primary and I think most dependable vehicle for implementing the leader's plan and vision. Another important aspect of teams is the talent base and the experience the teams bring to the creative process. In my work with the California Team Excellence Awards program, which is part of a national team excellence competition sponsored by the Association for Quality and Participation, or AQP, and they're located in Cincinnati, Ohio, I have found that teams are one of the most innovative and creative sources for improving organizational performance and implementing process improvements. The disadvantage to the democratic or participatory style of decision-making is that this process takes longer and often the leader doesn't have the luxury of time. This is why the successful leader must possess the ability to untangle the decision-making process so that important decisions can be made fast. At the same time, those decisions must be the right decisions. This, of course, is the definition of wisdom, the ability to make the right decision the first time. And time in business is money. It is also the difference between seizing an opportunity or losing that narrow window of opportunity. Thus, how leaders make a decision is very important. One of the most difficult parts about making decisions is weighing the risk. When leaders make decisions using the democratic or participatory model, it will take longer, and many constituents will want to contribute their ideas and viewpoints to the leader before the decision is made. Now, when using this approach, you run the risk of losing that window of opportunity. However, if leaders make decisions in a dictatorial manner, then they are usually forced to implement their decisions in a democratic way. For example, if an automobile company executive makes a dictatorial decision to stop doing business with a key supplier because of personality differences or quality problems, the leader must now try to sell his decision to the other key executives in his own company. And there's no guarantee that the other department heads at the automobile company will like the leader's decision to eliminate that supplier. Think about it. Perhaps the marketing director plays golf several times a year at the supplier's very prestigious country club, or the parts department manager receives priority delivery on his back-ordered parts shipments, and accounting receives a 3% discount from the supplier if they pay within 15 days, thus saving the auto company thousands and thousands of dollars annually. In this case, the leader might have a very tough selling job. Without the support of his key department directors, the leader cannot successfully implement his decision. And if the leader is forced to reverse his decision or back down, there could also be the negative repercussions associated with a knee-jerk reaction to a problem. Now let's take the Army general, who faces the same challenge when he decides, without the advice and counsel and support of his aides, to implement a certain battle strategy. He too must now convince his battalion commanders that his strategy will work and his army will be victorious. But because no one wants to be remembered for a failed plan or having his troops slaughtered in the battle, people are going to be hesitant to buy in to a strategy that they did not develop. But regardless of which method the leader uses to make his or her decision, leaders enjoy making decisions and implementing those decisions. And once the decision is made and then implemented, the leader moves on to the next issue or challenge. It's not uncommon for leaders to juggle many projects at the same time. This is most commonly the case with entrepreneurs who enjoy grabbing a project at various intervals out of the air, making a few decisions, and then sending the project back into orbit until enough new information or data has been gathered to make more decisions. So what then are the benefits of using a democratic decision-making process? Well, there are two very important benefits. The first is the leader builds consensus for his plan by using a participatory decision-making process. And secondly, once the decision is made, then the leader can implement the decision in a dictatorial fashion. For example, if we return to the earlier question of how the automobile executive will eliminate a supplier that continues to provide his company with poor quality parts, if that decision was made in a democratic or participatory manner, now the automobile executive can pressure and cajole his colleagues to honor their commitments to quality and start searching for alternative vendors who will reduce warranty work and stop costing the company money. Basically, the leader is able to say to his subordinates, "You were part of this decision and you agreed to it, so now you're obligated to help implement it and support it." So leaders have many ways they can make and implement decisions. When we return, we're going to talk about how organizations nurture leaders and how leaders develop their creative processes for new ideas and innovation. We'll be back right after these questions.
Let's begin with the first question and answer session. We try to answer as many questions as possible. Therefore, we ask that only one question be asked per phone call, and that questions be as brief as possible. You may call the studio directly at the phone numbers or fax which appear on the screen. We remind you to make your phone calls at a distance from the monitor to avoid feedback. Our first question from Medellin, Colombia. Go ahead.
Our question is the following. A large majority of our organizations have hierarchical structures that are vertical and rigid. If the whole process of leadership goes around change, how can we increase the risk capacity and awaken initiative and innovation amongst all the collaborators?
Well, that's an excellent first question, and thank you for that question. I think there are two issues here. Number one, obviously, if you are in a middle manager position, you are going to have to follow the culture and the values of your senior leadership because they set that tone. And you have to do that within the boundaries so that you don't lose your job. It's one thing to be creative and innovative within your own department or business unit, and at the same time, it's okay to suggest ideas that might be receptive or that senior leadership might be receptive to if you can find a champion within your organization. But taking your example of a very rigid vertical structure where the command and marching orders are given from the top down, the sphere of influence that you have in order to stimulate creative thinking or new ideas is going to be within your own business unit, because if you try to go outside of that business unit, you're going to meet greater resistance, especially in a very rigid organization.
Thanks, Tom. Our next question comes to us from Puebla, Mexico.
Our question is the following. A leader is made, not is born, but it's also born. How can we teach in education our students to become leaders? If a leader has to go by principles and values, how can we teach those positive ones?
Well, I think the development of a leader is really a three-stage process. First of all, you made the comment that leaders may be born, or they certainly are made. I think very few leaders are born. I think by and large, men and women become leaders as a result of a very positive influence from a mentor or a coach in an organization. For example, the chairman of General Electric, GE, Jack Welch, he has said in many interviews that his leadership development was a 25-year process. And remember that Jack Welch of General Electric only worked at one company his entire life. And when you have that kind of culture that encourages the development of leaders and grows leaders on the basis of proven leadership principles and very high standards and very progressive values, you're going to develop a crop of leaders that rises in an organization. And so, going back to your question, I think the 2 or 3 things that any organization can do is, number one, identify early on those men and women who want to be leaders, because not everybody wants to be a leader. Secondly, make sure that you train them and educate them in the ways of the corporate culture, certainly those aspects of your culture that work. And finally, then give them the opportunity to lead. And by the way, when I say the opportunity to lead, you also have to give them the opportunity to fail forward. What I'm talking about there is not every leader succeeds on every project. So you have to give them the opportunity, create an environment, if you will, in which the leader has an opportunity to experiment and try things and grow and learn from those experiments.
Thanks, Tom. I believe our next question is from the Dominican Republic. Is that the next one up?
From Santo Domingo, hello. How is it possible to attain interconnectivity of all people during 7 days, 24 hours in the next 5 years if half the population of the earth has never ever made one phone call in his or her life?
You're asking some tough questions. The question deals with connectivity and how is it possible for an organization, or I think in the context of your question, a population, to become connected with the progressive side of the world when you have people who are either undereducated or certainly underexposed to technology. I think the honest answer is that it's very difficult. But it's not necessary that an organization, or a country for that matter, has 100% buy-in. Let me give you the experience from my own country, the United States. Even though the United States is considered a very progressive country, there's a percentage of our population, probably 10 to 15% of our population, that is undereducated, that suffers from a lack of exposure to technology. So my point is simply this, that you don't need 100%. In fact, you really only need about 10% of the population engaged in connectivity. Because if you can get 10% of your population, or 10% of the employees in your organization that are thinking creatively, that are using technology, the high-tech, high-touch, if you will, that is enough of a catalyst to be able to stimulate progress in your organization.
Tom, let me just add that this is a question regarding the digital divide, what is commonly called the information haves and the have-nots. And it should be a priority of any government or any organization to provide as much assistance in bridging that digital divide as possible. Right here in San Diego, we are attempting to put in community centers that have internet access in some of the poorest communities in San Diego. There are long-term solutions to this, but I agree totally that everyone does not have to be connected in order for an organization to be successful.
You know, Peter, you raise an excellent point that our questioner asked, and I think it is the role of government and certainly corporate leaders to be able to take that initiative. In San Diego, where we are, there's an organization called the Classroom of the Future Foundation. And I would encourage any of our viewers to contact the International Training Center, and they could provide them with the information on the Classroom of the Future Foundation, which is using, as you say, that high technology to educate the children and to raise a new generation so that they're familiar with technology.
Very good, Tom. Our next caller is also from Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic.
Good morning, Maria Bisonó speaking here. If baby boomers don't want to retire and they don't let a new generation come up and release, they are already ready and professionalized and ready to go to work, what is going to happen then to the new leaders? Another question that we would like to have you answer perhaps is the difference between authority, power, and leadership, dictatorial leadership, and finally, about the ethical values in a leadership. Are they really indispensable in their role of inspiring in order to get people to think out of the box? Thank you. So we have 3 questions there.
Okay.
3 in 1.
I should remind callers to try to limit their questions to 1 question. So, Tom, you can take your pick of these.
Well, I want to make an exception for our friends in the Dominican Republic. First of all, with regard to the baby boomer generation, 2 things will happen naturally. We will die, and a new generation will come up. But I think the second thing that will happen very quickly within the next 10 years is that the Generation X and Generation Y, which are the 30 and 40-year-olds, 20 and 30-year-olds really, they're thinking outside the box. They're very creative. They have new ideas and new ways. And so as American President John Kennedy once said, we will pass the torch to a new generation because that's the natural way of the world. So I'm not concerned about the 20 and 30-year-olds. They will have their time and they will be able to implement their ideas. Let me go to the second part of your question with respect to authority and how leaders make decisions, because you asked about dictatorial decisions. There's nothing wrong with a leader making a decision from a dictatorial standpoint. The challenge that a leader has when he or she is very authoritative and uses the dictatorial approach to making a decision is that they must spend a great deal of energy and time to convince their colleagues that that decision is the right decision. And so that's the challenge of an authoritative leader using the dictatorial approach. Now, let me add one other thing here. If your style is a very strong, commanding type of leader, you have to be very careful not to come across as authoritative all of the time. And I say that because you will alienate most of the people in your organization if they think that every decision must be made by you. The other problem is you will stifle creative thinking. Why should anybody else think if, in fact, you're going to give them the answer before they can come up with another solution? So be careful, if you are an authoritative type leader, not to always use dictatorial methods to arrive at solving problems or coming up with an answer. Peter, the last part there I think is important too, and that's about the ethics.